Let me introduce you to my today's panel. My first panelist for today's show is Dr. Raheel Karim, who is a senior consultant psychiatrist. Assalamu alaikum, sir, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. Conversation started with you, sir. So when we do talk about intolerance, that too at a very basic level, we understand the fact that definitely this is something which is just not always triggered by individual factors. A lot of times we see that the particular socio-cultural dynamics, they in themselves also constitute a very important factor because of which people tend to become more intolerant of others. So from a psychiatric perspective, how would you explain that?
So Fatima, it was a very, very good question and a very pertinent question.
Thank you, sir.
But I think we must kind of first understand what tolerance and intolerance means.
Right.
So being tolerant is being able to respect other people's beliefs, other people's cultures, their lifestyle, their values. We live in a very global world which is very diverse. So diversity has to be embraced and acknowledged. Differences have to be acknowledged between people. You may disagree with that, but I think tolerance is the ability to harness your emotions in the presence of disagreement in accordance to your own beliefs.
That in a sir, very harmonious way.
Of course, of course. And similarly, I think intolerance is the exact opposite of that, you know, that you sometimes cannot respect other people's views, emotions, their lifestyles, their values, their beliefs.
True.
So I see tolerance on a spectrum actually. And it also depends on how many times you've been made tolerant.
Sir, I'll come to you, and here we must talk about both the short-term as well as the long-term impact of intolerance and discrimination in whatever form it may so exist on individuals. Now, we do see cases of racial injustice, we do see cases of gender discrimination, like she has very rightly so mentioned, and even cases where the trans community in the country has been discriminated against. But how do you feel does it impact any individual, both short-term and long-term?
The impact is on individuals, and then if you see individuals as a collection of people, it turns into a culture or it turns into a society. So I really think that tolerance or intolerance is basically an attitude, and then that attitude can turn into a habit, and then it can turn into a personality trait which is reliably reproduced in different kind of social situations. So as much as we have the genetics, the hand that we are dealt with by nature, the world we are nurtured in is what also determines our emotions and how we deal with them and how we express them.
So true.
Cultural factors are incredibly important in the fact that if you see various cultures, and sorry, I'll go into the historical background a little bit. If you actually look at the Ottoman Empire, you know, Muslims actually built churches. They actually protected Christians in Bosnia. So, great example of religious tolerance. If you actually look at Spain, the Islamic Spain, you know, many centuries ago, art, culture, everything flourished because all the communities came together to produce a really harmonious and unified community where progression could take place. So not only there are individual factors, there are many social, again, the sort of leadership that one has.
Sir, but one question which I would like to put to you is the fact that when we do talk about one's own biases, one's own prejudices, is there any way that, you know, you can actually tackle them or for that matter handle them so as to stop your own self from becoming intolerant? Because sometimes, at least from an objective viewpoint, I understand that there are a lot of issues that one perhaps may go through which you can very easily control, maybe by changing your mindset, maybe by changing the perspective with which you look things at.
Fatima, through clinical practice, I think one of the most difficult things to change is mindsets, you know. But I fully take your point. Mindset, how it develops is very important. We are nurtured in a particular way. We'll see our parents being intolerant, we'll see our teachers being intolerant. We go on the road, we see other people intolerant. And that is what you learn as a child. That is what you will eventually practice. So intolerance, although it is taught, but there is not much emphasis on the emotion of tolerance. So you have to have that real emotional intelligence.
True.
And you have to be in tune with your own self, with your environment, to be able to kind of work these things out and then develop a mindset which actually promotes healthy use of all emotions, including tolerance and intolerance.
And sir, professionals like yourself have a very important role to play, because if you get timely interventions, if you get timely treatments, there's so much that you can correct that too at a very early stage.
Of course. I think training begins at home. I think there's a lot of work done that bonding of all sorts, including children having emotional insecurity, happens in the first 5 years of anybody's life. Okay. So if we are reared properly and we have the right role models, we are more likely to copy that. If you can see somebody, if a child sees, if a son sees his father shaving, I'm pretty sure he'll put shaving foam on his face. So role models are very, very important.
Right. Everyone needs to be preemptive so as to steer clear of any kind of biases that
Very
way.
true.
Sir, I'll come to you, and here we must talk about the role of mental health care professionals like yourself too. Earlier, you spoke about the role of educationists and parents per se when it comes to tackling intolerance. But what about the role of mental health care professionals? And this is something that we did see taking lead in the COVID-19 pandemic, where we did see a lot of doctors like yourself, mental health care professionals like yourself, actually leading such movements. So why not, when it comes to cases like intolerance, do you not feel that here again the responsibility is something which equally falls on people like yourself?
So look, mentally ill, mental illnesses, mental health professionals, psychiatric medications are all marginalized. I would go as far, I was talking earlier to somebody that, I was a team leader for about 80,000 population. So you cannot define or develop a service for people for an indefinite amount of population. So you have to define your population, you have to know how many children, how many older people, and then you have to kind of develop strategies and programs or initiatives targeted to these people and their relevant problems. So look, having lived like yourself elsewhere in the world, you see it on the road. People will let you go, and say thank you to you, and you may never see those people again. Not giving way to an ambulance or to a fire brigade is seen as a criminal act. Crossing a road, people are taught, one of the most difficult things in England is to get a driving license, So tolerance is linked, or for that matter, any emotional control is linked with education. And I'm talking about specific education.
Targeted education.
Absolutely. So if you are taught to be able to wait, that's enormous teaching. To wait in a queue, to wait your turn, not to jump.
That being the eldest on the panel today, because he's the youngest,
yes.
and you're the eldest.
Yeah, I take your point very well. But in my opinion, there is no such thing as a generation gap. I think there is everything known as a communication gap.
That's a very interesting way to look at it.
Of course. So if parents are able to communicate with their children, and if teachers are able to communicate with their pupils, if employers are able to communicate with their employees, then problems can be resolved. Further new things can be developed. So I think if their parents are educated and children have similar interests, like my daughter is a medical doctor, I can talk to her about many, many things. And then very gradually I put in the emotional and the social side of things to her. So communication, and obviously very rightfully so, in a way that is acceptable to young people, in a way that is respectful. Kids are very smart, you know. We think children are not smart. They are much smarter than maybe I was when I was of their age.
Now.
Promoting communication and healthy communication, I think, is the key to resolving any problem, whether it's between countries or individuals.
Right. Further, sir, not only the government, the academia, but also the civil society and mental health care professionals like yourself, because we need to ensure that all the stakeholders then, they are on one page when it comes to addressing intolerance in the society.
Cannot disagree, but I think major issue is one of education. There isn't a country which is progressive in this world and which is not educated. And I'm talking about education in a very, very broad sense, including having to develop emotional intelligence and working on it. So as parents, we don't go to schools to learn how to parent our children. So education has to start from how we are parented. Our teachers have to be educated. In England, you will have counselors in schools and universities. There aren't very many mental health professionals properly trained who are able to, and some of them are not genuinely interested in terms of transmitting their knowledge and views over social media, which can be very far-reaching. So I think education is the key, and I'll say it as many times as you want. Education.
And so when it comes to elderly individuals and parents like you yourself very rightly so mentioned here after, but sir, moving towards the end of the show, before we wrap up today's discussion, what are the tips that you would want to give to the people out there, especially when it comes to actually incorporating that culture of tolerance in their respective lives? Because we can all start somewhere. So what do you propose would be a good starting point? What are the tips that you would want to give to the people?
I think as a general tip for all emotions, including tolerance and intolerance, we need to have an understanding of ourselves first, you know, and then we need to address and identify our biases. We need to then work through our intolerances, develop a habit of becoming tolerant, developing new neuroplastic pathways in the brain to be actually produce a self that is more tolerant, more understanding, which embraces diversity.
And also, sir, not to live your life in denial.
Of course
Because
not.
a lot of times you know that there is something wrong, you know that you're being intolerant, or for that matter, you're being subjected to intolerance, but you choose to stay quiet about it. So you need to be vocal about it.
So identifying and being vocal in the right way, you know.
Right.
So tolerance does not mean that you don't express yourself. Tolerance means that you express yourself in a socially acceptable and respectful manner. So reflective practice, I think before people should go to sleep, they should kind of reflect on how they have been intolerant or whether they've been tolerant and how they could have done things differently. So, and have your mental health issues addressed, including your psychological issues, and tolerance is certainly one of them. So I'll thank you at that, and thank you, Fatma, for inviting me.
On